Hi guys, I've been working on these sci-fi guns, and even though they're really fun, they take quite some time to illustrate. Line work generally takes a lot of time, and for me there's a lot of refining and a lot of tweaking. So I started thinking of a way to kickstart my line drawing sketches and potentially come up with a way to design a better 3D base in sculpting software that I can then turn into a line drawing. I already have blockouts. I've done them before for every gun, and they're just really quick versions of the initial silhouette sketches that I've done in 3D. But they are very loose, and they're good for just visualization purposes and for perspective reference. But if you look at it, I end up stepping away from the blockout quite a bit. It's just too loose. So what I want to do is I want to do a good chunk of work in a 3D application like 3D-Coat and focus purely on a large and medium type of details. And then once I'm happy with overall proportions and the detail distribution, I can take that 3D-Coat sketch into Photoshop and do minor details like bolts and holes and so on and so forth. Generally, when drawing something like this, there are certain types of details that take me quite a while, quite some time to get right. For example, those mechanical repetition type of patterns, or cylindrical details. They are difficult to draw, and I guess I'm lacking in a mileage to get them right from the first try. So I spend a lot of time doing cleanup. But programs like 3D-Coat, they allow a very easy creation of those types of details. So let's start, shall we? I've exported my blockout as an OBJ. In 3D-Coat, I'm gonna do voxel sculpting, and I'm gonna import my blockout. I've done my blockout in Maya. You can do it in SketchUp or any other 3D application. Reset space. So in here I will, let me just switch my stroke type. Okay, so here's my gun, my blockout. I'm gonna enable import without voxelization, and I'm gonna import to separate instances. Now if I press enter, you can see I have each individual object is on its own layer, and they're all polygons. They're not voxelized meshes, so I basically imported it as it is. If you're new to 3D-Coat, the navigation is fairly straightforward. I like to use ZBrush navigation method, ZB-like here under custom navigation. So basically, whenever you tap on and drag on empty space, you will orbit around the model. Pressing and holding Alt on the keyboard and tapping and holding on a empty space will pan your viewport, and if you release Alt, you will start zooming in and out. And let me just enable, I have a software that shows the shortcuts. I think it would be handy. You can see if I press Alt and button down, I can pan, releasing Alt will zoom in and out. Having these as a separate layers helps a lot, because I can isolate certain objects, certain parts. All I'm doing is I'm alt clicking on an icon to isolate the part. If you mouse over a part and press H on the keyboard, you can switch between them. You can see my parts aren't named, so pressing H helps. Let's start with this part. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna enable rotate around last draw point. So if I draw, it will rotate the pivot around the part of the mesh that I'm currently working on. I'm gonna switch this from surface to voxel mode, this S icon here. And you can see this becomes a uniform voxel mesh. I'm gonna press numpad 5 on the keyboard to switch to orthographic mode. And it is important to be aware that you're in a voxel mode, because you can see when I switch from voxel to sculpting, from voxel to surface mesh, the sculpting tools completely change. Certain tools are much more, like they behave quite differently, and sometimes there are advantages of being in surface mode. Sometimes it's better to be in a voxel mode to be able to perform a certain operation. And the main reason I really love voxels is because they aren't topologically dependent. They are, in fact, just a form. So if you feel like it, you can really just cut through the surface, and it's great. Okay, so I'm gonna be showing you tools one at a time. First of all, cutoff is something I would use a lot for something like this. Cutoff lets you literally just cut a shape. I'm pressing E on the keyboard and I'm choosing the circle lasso, and it lets me to cut a hole. But I do not want to cut a hole inside of this mesh, I want to cut it outside, so I'm dragging it. I can use space to relocate the selection, and if I press and hold shift and then release, it will cut the outer part. I'm pressing spacebar and hitting resample. Actually no, I wanted to res up, not resample. If the mesh looks jagged to you, it's probably because it's lacking in resolution. So resample makes it more dense, and it makes it more smooth and nice. W on the keyboard to enable disable wireframe. You can see over here, right by the name of the object, I have 12x. That means the object, this displays the density of the object. The rest of them are quite low, it's at 0.2. I think it's time to start looking at the reference. I'm gonna be working one piece at a time. I have a bunch of gun references on my other screen. These are some of the assault rifles I liked. Additionally, I've also did silhouette studies. To begin with. And this is the silhouette I want to have for my assault rifle. So I'm gonna just add this to my reference. I'm gonna take a screenshot of it. And over here I'll paste it. So now I can refer to it. I'm pressing S on the keyboard to enable the symmetry pop-up, and I'm gonna enable radial symmetry. And let's set it to 32. And you can see it's, symmetry is not working for me. The reason is because my object is offset. So what I'm gonna do is pick from bounding box, and it will move the kind of the origin to the bounding box of this mesh. And I'm gonna enable Z-axis. Yeah. And sometimes 3D-Coat will have like those little weird artifacts. Smoothing all helps. Switching back and forth also helps to clear this up. This is just kind of nature of voxels. They aren't particularly stable. You can use a cutoff to clean it up. Symmetry sometimes causes issues as well. Now I disabled the symmetry and I cut off those artifacts, and now I'm re-enabling it. And now I can modify the shape of the object. Currently using the grow brush. Let's try maybe clay. Using cutoff and pressing E and picking a different stroke type. Now, let's say I want to modify the proportion of this piece. I can use the pose brush or pose tool. With the lasso stroke type. We're gonna reset the axis, make sure it's moving properly. And then Control D to deselect. And you can see we modify the shape. So I've picked I grabbed an extrude brush and picked the square alpha. That is very mechanical. And if you right click and drag your mouse up and down, you can modify the intensity of the brush. So I'm setting it to a quite low amount, and I'm using this to create mechanical details. And drawing something like this in perspective can be very challenging, but in 3D I can very quickly generate cylindrical details. Pose tool again. In the stroke type drop down, I'm enabling ignore back faces. This way I get a nicer selection without any artifacts. Now I can do smooth all and maybe res up. And you can see we have a first part. It's a little bit smooth in terms of the sharpness. If you feel like adding more sharpness to it, you can always switch to surface mode and grab one of the more detailed brushes to really refine your mesh, like what I'm doing right here. It's really easy to get caught up in generating details in 3D and then realizing that you overdid it. And speaking of being caught up, I am currently totally caught up. It is a lot of fun though. Okay, switching back to voxels, and when you go back and forth, you can see 3D-Coat offers you the approximate amount of poly count required to maintain all the details. A lot of times it's not enough to actually maintain the details, so you would want to crank it up. In my case, I don't particularly care, and you can see all the details remain there. Switch into voxel mode. Nice and voxely. Now, without even looking at the reference, I know that I want the top part be more rounded up, and then there needs to be thickness variation. I could once again use the pose tool to kind of scale certain parts up and down, but I don't want that. I actually want to separate this part of the gun into more separate details. I'm going to be using a split tool. Split is very similar to cutoff, but instead of deleting, if you look at the right side of the screen right now, it separates a part into a separate object, which is totally amazing. So now I can grab my transform and I can create more thickness variation. For now I'm gonna keep it the way it is, and I'm gonna let's use scrape and let's use enable symmetry, disable symmetry plane. Once again, I'm pressing S on the keyboard. And you can see I can quickly move away from the boxy version of the model. Split. E, picking this stroke type. What it lets me do, it's like a polygonal lasso. Okay, grabbing this chunk and to use in transform. I know that in here I want to have some negative space going on, so I'm going to use cutoff with the polygonal lasso. Split with the rectangular selection. When you scale objects in voxel mode, you are actually stretching voxels, and then it becomes really hard to sculpt on these objects. You'll start seeing artifacts and so on and so forth. So what you want to do is right click on the scaled object, non-uniformly scaled object, and pick to uniform space, and it will turn it into a unified mesh. Now I can use cutoff, holding shift to constrain it, and I'm gonna res up to make it smoother. Move brush. So very quickly we are starting to establish a more mechanical look to the model. The grip, the only named object in a scene. Voxels, transform, I'm gonna just quickly scale it up a bit. Double click on empty space, connects the selection. If you put too many dots, you can press backspace to delete them, similar to Photoshop. Now, for organic stuff, I love this brush called Toothpaste. What it does is that it lets you create those nice strokes. And basically sketch in 3D. And I can use a move brush to quickly refine the shape. One of the nicest thing about 3D-Coat move brush is that if you modify the scale of the brush as you're using it, you can see the effect of the fall off. So it's really cool to introduce really nice looking curves. And you can see currently I'm just defining the main shapes. I'm not going crazy with details or anything like that. So for a trigger, let's try using a grow brush. And just literally draw a trigger, a really crappy version of a trigger in 3D space. You can see it created two versions of it because I have symmetry enabled. So if I disable symmetry, works, but it's not where I need it to be. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use Wax Layer. What it does is that it lets me draw a mask on a surface and then it extrudes a new shape out of that mask. So I'm pressing enter and I have a brand new layer that I can enable and disable. I'm gonna use the move brush to quickly sculpt the trigger. This is a rough approximation. I don't know what this trigger is gonna look like yet, but it does the trick. Once again, using the wax layer to extrude a new shape. Instead of round border, I'm gonna use straight and press apply. Creates a nice new shape. Cut off. The move tool has this ability to move objects that you click on. I don't want it, so I'm gonna disable it. Here we go. So if I enable pick by click, you can see I can switch between layers by clicking on them. If I disable it, it stays on one tool, which is great. That's what I want for now. The frontal grip handle. I need to make sure I have this radial symmetry on it. Extrude with the square alpha. Lets you really quickly come up with a shape. You can also do things like this, kind of generate a quick texture, which is pretty cool. Another thing is there is a Wax Hide brush. What it does is it hides a certain part of your object, but it doesn't delete it. It's really handy when you want to temporarily hide, let's say, this part, and now I can go ahead and use cutoff with the circle stroke type to sharpen the borders of this mesh. So you can see I made them much sharper now. And now if I go to geometry and hide all, this thing is still there. I don't want the texture. I'm gonna look more at the references. The body is gonna be a little bit more complicated since it's a big intricate piece. Gonna use transform to make it slightly wider so I have more space to do my cuts. And cut off, my friend. Very quickly I'm starting to establish the 3D form. Alright, so wax layer, drawing my shape. I actually want it slightly thicker, so maybe 3, press apply, and now I'm using cutoff to make it more rectangular. I also want more resolution on it. Increase the resolution on the main body. So one of the nicest thing about 3D-Coat is that you can jump into the render tab and enable real-time rendering, and you can quickly preview a very realistic looking representation of your model. Back to Sculpt tab. There's a slight curvature on the ammo clip. I can just use the move brush. It's kind of AK-47 inspired. So I'm gonna use this stroke type. What it does is it creates really nice curves. There's also, previously I've been using wax layer. There's also wax extrude. What it does is same thing as wax layer, but it doesn't move the new geometry onto a separate layer. Can be handy in some cases. Not quite what I wanted. What it also does, for some reason it switches it to a surface mode. Okay, so I'm gonna set the offset to 1. And I'm gonna press apply. And it extrudes and switches to surface. I don't want it to be surface. Back to voxels. Cut off. Next step, I'm gonna create this other attachment railing. I'll use split. Our back faces off. And you can see we have a split version. Transform. If something gets in the way, you can ghost it by hovering over a mesh and pressing G. This way you can see better. Now, next thing I want to do is create the railing. I use a primitive for this. There are a variety of different methods, but let's try primitive. So basically just a cube. What I want to do though, I want the sticking out parts to be on a separate layer. So I'm gonna click this, create a space with identical density. And what it does, it basically creates an empty layer that is as dense as the one that I have had previously selected. Back to my primitives, you can see it maintains the placement, which is great. This is probably how thick we want it to be. Now if I press enter, except make sure it's set to add. We can use fillet. Fillet is great. And it's a little bit too low in terms of subdivision. Oh, because I selected the wrong layer by accident. So back here, press enter. And you can see it's nice and subdivided. It's slightly offset. I don't know why. Probably my symmetry got screwed off, but it's relatively easy to adjust. Gonna make borders sharper. I don't want to have any artifacts, any voxel artifacts, so I'm gonna turn this mesh into a surface. Okay, I'm going to instancer, and what it does, it duplicates your mesh. So I'm just pressing new instance, disabling pick by click. New instance, moving, new instance, moving, and I'm kind of just eyeballing it. The nice thing about them being instances, now if I go ahead and I modify one piece, they all update. Now that I duplicated a few of them, I'm selecting the parent, the very first guy, and I'm clicking new instance. And what it does, it duplicates the entire hierarchy, so I can create this thing much faster. Okay, now if I just press delete on the excessive ones, you can quickly get rid of them. Okay, now the problem is my axis was screwed, so I moved it on an angle. Yeah, well, that's crappy. Set axis, yeah, see, it was doing it again. New instance. And we got a bunch of duplicated mechanical details. Now what I want to start doing is splitting up the mesh into smaller individual parts and start just refining the sculpt. So for example, this guy here, the handle needs to be separated. So let's do that with the cutoff, split. So I can build up the surface with using toothpaste. then with cutoff, refine it further. One stroke type I didn't show you yet, I don't think, is a regular lasso. Can be really handy for freehand stuff. It's basically drawing in 3D. And another tool is plane. What it does is, if you right click on a surface, it will define a plane in Z depth, and you can use that plane to cut off, or if you press Ctrl, to build up a surface, which is really handy for creating the flat planes. It helps to use different materials. Personally, kind of prefer ZBrush matte caps more right now, because ever since 3D-Coat switched to PBR, the material selection is I'm not particularly happy with it, but it might be just a matter of me not having a good library yet. Once I'm happy with the shape, I can switch to the surface mode. And in the surface mode you can use all these awesome presets to really go ahead and like refine it. These are very similar to ZBrush brushes. I like to use Control-Shift decimation algorithm to selectively reduce topology. And there's all sorts of cool new presets that looks like they just introduced. Another interesting brush is Angulator. You can see it creates an angular crease. Alright guys, so we have the overall shape blocked out, but I'm still fuzzy on a lot of the details. For example, I have no idea what I want the scope to look like, and I know that there needs to be something happening in the like area where the clip connects to the trigger. But I don't know what I want it to look like. So the two approaches are you can either just stick to 3D and, you know, use primitives to block shapes out, and like using 3D-Coat booleans you can, you know, subtract and generate ideas this way. But in my case, I really don't like doing it this way, because you never see the model as a whole at the same time. You're adding one detail, then you're adding another detail, and then in the end it comes like when you see the whole thing, it might not be what you want. And that's why I do most of my designs in 2D in Photoshop. And I love mixing and matching them and having like going back and forth while I'm designing to make sure that I have the shapes and the shape language that I'm most happy with. Now, a lot of 3D concept artists do it purely in 3D, and that's great. With the more mileage you have doing it only in 3D and the more familiar you are with the design language you're going for. Like if you've been a gun artist for video games for the last 10 years, you probably don't have to even think about it, about the shapes that you're going to apply. You just go ahead and quickly block it out. I'm not a pro gun artist who's been designing only guns. I take my time and switch back to Photoshop and quickly doing a really rough 2D sketch on top without any perspective, just to establish a more refined silhouette and the shapes that that are going to be inside of the gun. Okay, and that's what I'll do. Screenshot. The canvas size doesn't really matter. The bigger, the better. I'm gonna scale it up since it's just a backdrop. And at this point, I'll just speed this video up and do a quick sketch. And well, once I'm done, I'll explain my decisions after. And here you can see how fast I was able to iterate on that clip receiver. If I were to do it in 3D, it would take much longer. So currently I'm looking for better ways to subdivide this shape. It all comes down to subdivision and how you divide your shape to create smaller sci-fi patterns. Okay, speeding it up again. Alright guys, so in here we end up with a really loose sketch that will serve as a great start for me to start refining the 3D blockout. And if you compare the before and after, I was able to make this blockout much more refined with just a really quick doodling on top. It was really simple, there was no perspective involved whatsoever. I'm leaving the perspective challenge for my 3D model, but this helped me tremendously to establish the shape language for the model. So next step is going to be to save this out as a screenshot or as a flat image and move back to 3D-Coat and start applying my changes. Alright, now in 3D-Coat, I'm gonna click reference image for x-axis and I'm gonna pick my sketch. I'm gonna reset it, and you can see we've imported the image and it's ginormous. Oh, and I'm also painting on it, so I don't want to do that. I'm gonna scale X and set it to like 20. It's still too large, so scale it down and place it above our image, above our sculpt. And I'm gonna scale it so it roughly matches the scale of my model. Alright, great. Okay. Close guides. Let's start by cutting into this object using cutoff. E for stroke types. Nice. Okay. Split this piece apart. Okay, so since I stretched this piece, I'm gonna set it to uniform. Actually, it looks already uniform, but just to be certain. Yeah, okay. Cut off. Now, this chunk, I want it to be a sphere. So technically, I could probably get rid of this entire tool. But instead of deleting it, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna press this clear current object button, and you can see it keeps the layer but deletes everything within it. And I'm gonna use this layer to add its cylinder. Use this to rotate it. If you hold Control, you will restrain it to 45-degree angles. Looking good. Okay, press and enter. Now I'm gonna duplicate this with same density. Clear it. So now I have another clear layer with nothing in it. And I'm gonna insert another one, but with more thickness, to form this little ring. Press enter. I'm gonna raise it up. Press enter. Move it to the side. Now this butt needs to be wider. The problem is now if I scale it, the other parts are children of the main component. So I'm gonna right click, change parent, and set it to root. Okay, now I can scale this guy. And you can see because I scaled it non-uniformly, this object, I get a warning on the bottom saying non-uniform. So right click and to uniform space, and it's back to being uniform. I can probably res it up. That's good. So the image plane kind of gets in the way right now. I guess I could do this. Yeah. Okay, next thing, I shortened this part, so I'm gonna do the same in here. And then this guy can be shortened as well, or needs to be shortened, cut off. Another thing that I've done is that I've made the railing thicker, so it's more prominent. I'm gonna use primitives, and I'll use a box with a fillet. Okay, so get it in place, and right now it's set to add. I'm gonna press Ctrl Enter to invert it, and you can see we get a nice extract. No, accidentally pressed Enter. So I'm gonna move this part up using Pose Tool. Okay, the front part could use a little bit cutting as well. Okay, and this part I'm gonna split off. I'm gonna adjust the guides to match the body closer, and then the rest is not as important, I would say. So split is our friend. Okay, cut off. Now we're gonna split this part. Now, if you look at it in perspective, we can start making variations in thickness. So the handle right now is in surface mode, so I'm switching it to voxels. Building up surface, cut off. And I'm gonna duplicate it. Move it over here and create this loop. I'm adding resolution as I go. Okay, so now with the mouse, I'm right clicking the points that I want to be hard. Okay, so once I'm happy with the interpolation of my points, press and enter, bam. Okay, I'm gonna extract this piece. So, box layer, I'll use this stroke thing again. Okay, looks good. Ignore back faces off, so I'm pressing enter. And thickness 3 is too thick, let's do 0.5, and layer offset, let's do 0.2. Looking good for the most part. A little bit of cleanup here. And then with cutoff, I'll actually do that around with this part. Looks great. Transform. Move it in place. And you can see we're starting to get some more advanced looking shapes. At this point I'll be using all the same tools. And let's enable the image plane. I keep accidentally painting on my reference image, and it seemed to slow down the 3D-Coat. I'm gonna grab this guy and I'm gonna duplicate it. I want to duplicate it with children, so I wonder if merge subtree. Interesting. So I believe it's caused by these objects being instances. I can't merge them together. So what I'm gonna do is grab the instancer, and I'll an instance current. Okay, now if I merge subtree, you can see it works. So duplicate it. And I want it to be voxels, so I can cut them off. Vox layer. And I keep going back and forth, which might be slowing me down, so I'm gonna start working one piece at a time. Back to my handy extrude brush. I'm gonna resample it to decrease the resolution a bit. Okay, so switching it to surface mode, and with the surface mode I'm gonna smooth this area out. And right now it's hard to smooth because it's really dense, so I'm gonna make the brush bigger and use Control and Shift with decimate option on to really smooth it out. Or alternatively, I could just cut it off like this, and then add a cylindrical primitive. Okay, now primitive on and symmetry on. I need a cube, and then enable click to place, something like this, and let's set this count to maybe something like 4. This is great. I'm gonna enable fillet, and I'm just gonna scale it. Okay, Control Enter. probably gonna make it slightly smaller. I would like this corners to be slightly sharper. Using split brush, I'm gonna split this guy off. Now cut off. Hold and shift. Cut around. And we have a great cut. And now I'm gonna crank up the symmetry back to 32. And using the cutoff again, I'm gonna establish this angle. And the scrape could probably do a good job. And you can see it's really dense right now. I don't need it to be this dense. I'm gonna resample it and set it to like a factor of 0.4. Duplicate. In 3D-Coat it's really easy to define shortcuts. If you mouse over, you can see and to define a hotkey. So I'm gonna mouse over this guy, press End, and I'm gonna press Shift D on the keyboard. So now Shift D is my shortcut to duplicate something. So Shift D, Shift D. So really quickly created the space. Now, what I want to do is merge down all of them into one tool, one layer. So right click, and then merge. So I'm adding these as children, so I can merge them together. And the way I'm doing it is I'm grabbing this handle and I'm moving it on that plus sign. It's a little bit tricky. So now if I grab this guy, and I can also merge them into one. Merge subtree. Next step, what I'm gonna do here is I want this really straight border here. So I'll do this. Very easily I've flattened that surface. I'm gonna use box layer again. And I'm gonna enable ignore backfaces. This way it's gonna only apply it where I need it to. Now for rounded corners I can do something like this. So when stroking you can see that 3D-Coat actually picks up the other subtools, other layers. So what I want to do is I want to ghost this guy, and this way I can brush through it without it affecting my brush strokes. And you can see it says ghosted volumes, don't pick, don't act, which is good. There's an issue with symmetry. So the way symmetry works in 3D-Coat, if you click on one side of the object and then make sure symmetry is there, it's working, and when you do sim copy, it will copy it from the part that you clicked on onto the other side. Now I'm gonna grab, I don't want to cut all the way through, although I have a cap at the back, so it doesn't matter. So what I'm gonna do is grab cut off, grab this guy, that is actually really handy. I never used it as much before. And I'm gonna start clicking. Now right click where I want hard edges to be. Enter. And you can see we cut off a nice mechanical part. Other than the fact that I don't want a hole here, so the nice part is that I can undo. Okay, and in order to reposition a point, if I remember correctly, edit points, I can just move it up and then press enter. If I want, I can really easy way to create a very complex shapes. And you can also, I believe, save this profile as a preset and reuse it later. In my case, I don't particularly care, so that's good. Cutoff is what I'm using 90% of the time here. Okay, so this is good, but maybe, let's say we want the bottom flattened. So I'm gonna grab it like this, disable symmetry. Another thing that I can do is if you enable freeform, you can basically create a lattice, but this lattice for some reason is really big. Fit, there we go. And this is really cool. Do cool shapes like this. But this might be not what I want. The part that bugs me is the thickness over here. Do something like this. So C right now is assigned to color, and I don't use color as much, but I use a lot of cutoff. So okay. This is my new favorite tool to use. I'll crank up the resolution first. I can't use spacebar menu because it will relocate my selection. So I'm just gonna go down here and press res up. Line. And what line does is that it creates a fall off. Not sure how I feel about this curve. Back to sculpting mode. Move. So this guy, I'm gonna set the parent to root so I can hide other stuff. And now I would like to trim it slightly. A few ways to do it. I can probably just convert it to a surface and use a trim brush. So for pose tool, I'm gonna set up shortcut P. Yeah, we probably want to split it somewhere here. Now, let's say I want to add something like a bevel here. An easy way to do it, using wax hide. So I'm gonna hide everything other than the part that I want beveled, and then back to cutoff. Yeah, I did a cool bevel. Now geometry and hide all. Enter. Command U. Well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna split off the body. Split. This way I can still keep the radial symmetry on it. Okay, so this guy pose, and I'm gonna use lasso.